Broadcasting from the Civic Cypher Studios, welcome to the QR Code, where we share perspective, seek understanding, and shape outcomes. The man you are about to hear from is a man who is always willing to take a little bit of extra time to make sure I understand fully. It means the world to me, and he's such a special person in my life. He is the Q in the QR Code. He goes by the name of Q Ward.
The voice that you just heard is the person I would select to have the debate with anyone opposed to us, because he'd be the most prepared. He is the North Star of the show, my brother, the R in the QR Code. He goes by the name Ramses Ja.
And we need you to stick around. We got a special show in store for you today. A little later on in the show, we're going to be talking to a bright young mind in the political space. He is a content creator and a political pundit. He's 13 years old. He goes by the name of Noah De Barrasso. Q actually introduced me to him. And he is doing some big things. And we're going to tap in with him a bit later to get his thoughts on young people's role in politics, even if they're not voting age yet, and how politics does involve young people, and that, you know, those of us in a position to vote and shape the world can account for young people a little bit better. So really excited to talk to him. And then we're going to contrast that with the first part of the show, where we spend a good amount of time talking about young Republican leadership. We kind of touched on it a bit yesterday. I suspect we're going to be talking about it a little bit more, but the short of it is a group chat leaked, and it exposed how Republican leadership behaves, and it's very sad. But before we get there, as always, we like to start off the show with a feel-good feature, and today's feel-good feature comes from the Associated Press. The Arthur M. Blank Family Foundation announced a $50 million donation to Atlanta's historically Black colleges and universities on Monday, aiming to close financial aid gaps that might otherwise prevent students from completing their degrees. The money will support nearly 10,000 students with GAP scholarships if they are approaching graduation in good academic standing and have exhausted all other sources of financial support. The aim is to raise graduation rates at Clark Atlanta University, Morehouse College, Morris Brown College, and Spelman College, according to the foundation's announcement. Quote, "These grants are a material investment in hope," unquote, said Faye Twersky, the foundation's president. The 10-year commitment comes days after the Trump administration said it would redirect nearly $500 million in federal funding toward HBCUs and tribal colleges as a one-time investment. A similar amount would be cut from colleges with large enrollments of Hispanics and other minorities, amid other moves to eliminate programs that promote diversity in higher education. So that's something. I mean, 50 million doesn't offset 500 million, but it symbolically it matters. And it shows that the be all and end all is not Donald Trump. And a lot of people, especially on college campuses, might have needed that hope. Any thoughts here, Q?
Like you said, man, I'm glad that everyone hasn't subscribed to MAGA.
Yeah.
Right? Like it's not everything that we need. It's not enough. Hey. But it does feel good to hear that there is someone who's profited from capitalism that hasn't completely sold their souls, sure, if you will.
Sure. All right. So we're going to spend some time talking about this. I will do my best not to pontificate too long, but this is a very disturbing thing. Now that we've had a chance to kind of get into the weeds of it, find out who the people were that were saying what they were saying in this young Republican leadership group chat thread thing, and really break that down a little bit more. So some of these articles are quite verbose, but stick with me. I think there's a lot here. I think we should start, Q, by painting the picture a little bit. So we're going to front load this with a lot of written word, but again, I promise if you stick with me, we're going to make some points that I think people need to know about. So I'll share from Politico. Leaders of young Republican groups throughout the country worried what would happen if their Telegram chat ever got leaked, but they kept typing anyway. They referred to black people as monkeys and the watermelon people, and mused about putting their political opponents in gas chambers. They talked about raping their enemies and driving them to suicide, and lauded Republicans who they believed support slavery. We're going to circle back to these gas chambers and these monkeys things. I think that's really important. All right. William Hendricks, the Kansas Young Republicans vice chair, used the words. These are just the N-word, basically, variations of the racial slur, more than a dozen times in the chat. Bobby Walker, the vice chair of the New York State Young Republicans at the time, referred to rape as epic. Peter Giunta, who was at the time chair of the same organization, wrote in a message that was sent in June that everyone that votes no is going to the gas chamber. Giunta was referring to an upcoming vote on whether he should become chair of the Young Republican National Federation, the GOP's 15,000 member political organization for Republicans between 18 and 40 years old. Quote, "I'm going to create some of the greatest physiological torture methods known to man. We only want true believers," unquote, he continued. Two members of the chat responded. Quote, "Can we fix the showers? Gas chambers don't fit the Hitler aesthetic," unquote. Joe Maligno, who previously identified himself as the general counsel for the New York State Young Republicans, wrote back. Quote, "I'm ready to watch people burn now," unquote. Annie K. Cady, I think that's how I say that, New York's National Committee member, said. The exchange is part of a trove of Telegram chats obtained by Politico and spanning more than 7 months of messages among young Republican leaders in New York, Kansas, Arizona, and Vermont. The chat offers an unfiltered look at how a new generation of GOP activists talk when they think no one is listening. Since Politico began making inquiries, one member of the group chat is no longer employed at their job, and another's job offer was rescinded. Prominent New York Republicans, including Representative Elise Stefanik and State Senate Minority Leader Rob Ort, have denounced the chat, and festering resentments among young Republicans have now turned into public recriminations, including allegations of character assassination and extortion. The 2,900 pages of chats shared among a dozen millennial and Gen Z Republicans between early January and mid-August chronicle their campaign to seize control of the National Young Republican Organization on a hardline pro-Donald Trump platform. Many of the chat members already work inside the government or play party politics, and one serves as a state senator. Together, the messages reveal a culture where racist, anti-Semitic, and violent rhetoric circulate freely, and where the Trump-era loosening of political norms has made such talk feel less taboo among those positioning themselves as the party's next leaders. Okay, we're going to stop here. Of course, the rest of this article is up. It's a political article. It's much longer than that, but I think this is a good stopping point. I want to share something, and then I want you to share something, and then we'll continue because there's a little bit more. I knew that some of these things were in this chat. I just didn't realize how deep it went. I didn't realize how long it went on. And as opposed to some off comments that people made in jest, this shows, as the article says, a culture, a long-standing culture where this was normal. And this gives more insight into how these people feel. Now, I said this on a recent episode. I'll say it again. This is the future of the Republican Party. And this group chat, and all the people in the group chat were participating. Even those that were silent, that didn't call it out, were participating in the group chat. Okay. This gives insight into the culture of republicanism around the country. I don't believe that this is isolated. I don't think that this is a thing that, in fact, we're going to get into something a little bit later on that shows that this is a long-standing sort of approach to other races, other faiths, etc., by Republicans. It goes all the way back. And so for people who vote Republican, people who, feel like conservative is the way to be, those Bible thumper, all those folks that say to us, non-white Christian heterosexual men who feel that their thinking is toxic and their policies are based in toxicity, instead of saying that we have a victim complex, instead of saying that we're imagining things, they have to kind of eat this. And maybe they will push this aside and sweep it aside and say, well, this is just a small group of kids. This doesn't represent Republicans. I'm going to make that case in just a second. I just want to get your reflections on what we have so far, Q.
I think the most difficult part about discovering this story is that there's a narrative that I believed for a very long time that I was excited about. And it was that this next generation wouldn't be as racist. They'd be more informed. They'd have more friends who weren't from their exact cookie cut background. They'd go to college. They'd have roommates. They'd have teammates. They'd have boyfriends. They had girlfriends. They had neighbors. They'd have friends. They'd connect with people that were not like them. And they would be more forward thinking and more evolved and more tolerant and more accepting and more open. And I'm watching that narrative dissolve because those very strong, passed down from generation to generation seeds of hate and racism, othering, misogyny, like all these things that we've seen for so long that we were told, and I'm sure you heard this too, the next generation of young people is going to bring forward this less racist, more accepting, world. And we're seeing the very youngest of them and those who are next in line to be the leaders of this country and of that party feel exactly like their forefathers did. Feel exactly how people felt 60, 70, 80 years ago. That we haven't made all this progress, that we are not closer to a country and a culture and a world that sees people as people and not just as the social constructs of race that were designed to keep them separate and fighting. So, yeah, this is very disheartening. But that feeling is not specific to just this story, but it kind of shores up the doubts that I had about that dream place coming true or ever being realized. All these years later, that party and that group of people more specifically, because that party was called the other party once upon a time, but the ideals were the same.
Yeah.
It's incredibly discouraging, disheartening, and really heartbreaking. I'm like, I've been angry for so long that I'm starting to get sad. You know what I mean? Like at the idea that the dream of Martin Luther King Jr. will actually never be realized. It's not that it's happening slowly and that we'll get there one day. We're never going to get there. We're not closer at all. And in the last 10 years, in the last 9 months, we've taken 60 years of steps backward. It's just incredibly, incredibly disheartening, man.
Well, I think this next segment is going to bring that even more into focus for our listeners. We've talked about this before, and so this will come as no surprise to you, Q. We didn't even send. We have a prep sheet that we work from when we do our show. I didn't even send it to Q because he doesn't need it. I'm going to just get into it, and I'll make my connections. All right, this is from the BBC. Former U.S. President Ronald Reagan described African delegates to the UN as monkeys in newly unearthed tapes published by a U.S. magazine. He made the comment in a 1971 telephone call with then President Richard Nixon. By the way, I heard this phone call. Ramses, I heard it with these ears. I heard them say all the stuff I'm about to read to you. So you can fact check it all you want, but I actually heard this. Okay. Let me continue. All right. Mr. Reagan, who was governor of California at the time, was angered that African delegates at the UN sided against the US in a vote. Members of the Tanzanian delegation started dancing after the UN voted to recognize China and expel Taiwan. Mr. Reagan, who was a supporter of Taiwan, called the president the following day to express his apparent frustration. He said, to see those monkeys from those African countries, expletive deleted them, they're still uncomfortable wearing shoes. Mr. Nixon, who quit as president in 1974, can be heard laughing. Now, that's all I'm going to share from right now. If you want to hear the rest of it, it's recorded. I think it's like part of the National Archives now, right? This didn't get released until way later. This is like a modern thing that was covered, but the telephone call took place in 1971. So all the people back in the 70s that were saying, hey, look, these people are racist people. Nixon is a racist person. Ronald Reagan, Richard Nixon, all these folks, they're racist people. Strom Thurmond, all these folks. I guess he was like outwardly racist, but people were trying to say that back then. And then people saying, no, they're not racist. You are reading too much into things, blah, blah, blah. This clearly is racist language. They're talking about black people being monkeys and whatever, and surprised wearing shoes or whatever. It's one of the things that Republicans kind of rely on to maintain their fidelity to that party, while still feeling like they are not racist, nor are they supporting racist people or policies. And this lays bare the fact that they have been the whole time. And the connection I want to make is, remember, I just quoted, what was it? Ronald Reagan calling African delegates monkeys. Ronald Reagan, that was the president. So was Richard Nixon, who, by the way, said his own nonsense in this call. But Ronald Reagan, the person who black people, he had in the modern era prior to Trump, had the most pronounced negative impact on black Americans by a long way. Prior to Donald Trump. Donald Trump beat that by a long way. Ronald Reagan is calling black people monkeys. Okay, that's Republican leadership from, the late 70s, early 80s, okay? Let's scroll back up, because Ronald Reagan called them monkeys. Let me go back up in this article. Leaders of young Republican groups throughout the country worried what would happen if their Telegram chat ever got leaked, but they kept typing anyway. They referred to black people as monkeys and the watermelon people, and mused about putting their political opponents in gas chambers. I'm going to circle back to the gas chambers thing in a second. Okay, so we see the through line. Ronald Reagan calling them monkeys, and now these young Republicans calling them monkeys the other day. Okay? So for us that say, Republican policies, Republican leadership, these Republican people, they don't care about black people. For us to say that these people are racist, everything that they do is based in racism. Racism is the only thing that answers all of the questions. It checks every box. It's not just, their fiscal conservative, whatever, their, every issue that we have. If we just say, okay, well, it's based in racism, it checks every box. It satisfies every question that a person might have as to why are they doing this. Racism, that's the answer. Okay. Now, Republicans don't like that answer because they don't like to, or at least once upon a time, they did not like to be associated with racism. They wanted the veneer and the shine of being, welcoming and a loving person, law abiding, God fearing. They wanted all of that. But underneath it all is this nonsense that we've been talking about all along, and it typically doesn't get exposed until somebody exposes it. Imagine what we don't see that is reflected in the policies. And they use crafty language, and they use, Q and I were having a conversation before we started recording. They use different ways of targeting people so that while it has a most pronounced effect on black and brown and marginalized people, it cannot be legally determined to only negatively impact black and brown and marginalized people. So they use these political language and in this legalese or whatever to get this stuff off, and we don't get a chance to see what they really feel about their fellow human beings or fellow countrymen until someone exposes them and it's laid bare. I'm going to say one last thing, and I want to give the rest of the time to you, Q. But I just want to make sure that I include this. So JD Vance mounted a defense of these young Republican leaders. Okay. This is from PBS.org. Vance, 41, said he grew up in a different era where most of the stupid things that I did as a teenager and as a young adult, they're not on the internet. The father of three said he would caution his own children, especially his boys, to not put things on the internet and be careful with what they post. If you put something in a group chat, assume that some scumbag is going to leak it in an effort to try to cause you harm or cause your family harm. So he's saying that the person leaking it is the scumbag. Okay, so he's clearly going to be an apologist here, but watch where I go with this. He says, I really don't want us to grow up in a country where a kid telling a very offensive stupid joke, is caused to ruin their lives. Okay. He's ignoring the fact that these people will get in leadership positions and enact policies that ruin the lives of marginalized people, and have done for at least 50 years, according to this conversation that Q and I have having. And then, of course, we can make other arguments going back further. But another thing that I don't have here, but I know from JD Vance's comments, is that he tried to compare a Democratic, an elected Democratic official, if I'm not mistaken. He made a comment saying, I wish that someone would put 2 bullets in the head of a Republican person, right? Gross, disgusting, on its face. That's political violence, calling for political violence, even those behind closed doors, okay? So JD Vance says, well, as long as they're not talking like that, then I think we need to be focusing on the Democrats, because Democrats are the ones calling for violence. He used that one example to say it, okay? Calling for the 2 bullets in the head. Political violence is wrong. Calling for political violence is wrong. Totally will see that. But watch this. Let me go back up. They referred to black people as monkeys and the watermelon people, and mused about putting their political opponents in gas chambers. Does that not sound like political violence to JD Vance? All right. I got a couple more notes here, but I don't need to get to them. Q, I want to make sure that you have a long runway here. So your thoughts?
Not sure how long my runway is, but I would try to communicate some things, especially with regards to Ronald Reagan and Republicans in general. You said they used to not want to be associated with racism. They've always not cared about being associated with racism. They do overtly racist things. They just don't like being called racist.
Okay, that's what I'm trying to say.
And that's still true today. They still don't like being labeled that way, even though they've gotten more and more overt at the racist things that they do and say. Ronald Reagan is a great example to use, though, of what the old Republicans used to do. So Ronald Reagan issued executive orders to enhance federal support for HBCUs. Hey, look, I'm not racist. He signed legislation like the Excellence in Minority Health Education and Care Act, which supported predominantly Black health professions and students. However, he cut actual funding to higher education, increased cost of higher education, and took grants and turned them into loans, which created barriers to access higher education for Black people. Yeah. So it's like, hey, look, I have a Black friend. I couldn't be racist, while doing incredibly racist things.
Sure.
So he was one of the pioneers, right, of making sure we didn't become a socialist country, because Black people would benefit from such programs. So, as you said, a veneer of goodness, a veneer of benevolence, but the underbelly and the internal combustion engine that drove policies for Republicans forever has been based on the oppression of Black and poor people. But racism was the vehicle, because that's how you convince poor white people to vote against their own best interest. If you make them other and hate their neighbors that are Black and blame their conditions on their neighbors that are Black and then later Hispanic. So it's really, really interesting that you brought up Ronald Reagan, my least favorite president of all time. because I understand almost fully that he's the reason why we don't have greater access to education and healthcare. He literally created policy to make those things less accessible to everyone, to make sure they were less accessible to us.
Yeah. And I want to add one more thing here, because I know that people that listen to this that disagree are going to say Republicans are simply just not racist. This is just a small group of whatever, however they explain it. And then they're going to push back and say it's the Democrats who are racist, right? Democrats were the party of slavery. Conservatives were the party of slavery. Once upon a time, the conservatives called themselves the Democrats. Okay. It was the conservatives that wanted to conserve slavery. I want to make sure that that's stated, well stated. And you know, the two parties, the two-party system, they've been called by a number of names throughout the years in this country, this country's existence. But they switched platforms. The beginning of that started around the time of the Great Depression, kind of solidified around the time of the Civil Rights Movement, and just after that, when Black people kind of put their support behind the newly minted Democratic Party, using that term. The other thing that I want to say is that people will say, well, it's not Democrats, it's their failed policies. You know, the Democrats themselves might, you know, try to, you know, smile all in your face, but really they do racist stuff. They're racist policies, look at inner cities, blah, blah, blah. They have all those conversations. But I could argue successfully against anybody that Republican policies are far more damaging in the material world that we all share, the reality that we all live in, for Black, brown, and marginalized people, than Democratic policies. Democratic policies at least are based in the idea that something good might happen. And Republican policies don't even account for that. And that is a distinction I think everybody needs to come to terms with in order for us to have a functioning conversation.